Peter Jackson, an esteemed Oscar-winning Hollywood filmmaker, one we associate with prestigious, artistic and wholesome films. Films for all the family, films that are set and shot against the beautiful landscapes of New Zealand, films about hobbits, about elves, about magical dwarves.
Party's over.
But in his early career, Jackson had a somewhat different reputation, and in 1992, he made a film so nauseatingly disgusting, it soon got a reputation for being the grossest, goriest, and bloodiest movie ever made. Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of the zombie movie as we review Peter Jackson's squelchy masterpiece, Braindead.
Rich and creamy, just the way I like it.
Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres across several weeks. We are currently in the middle of exploring the evolution of the zombie movie, and this is part 13, in which we're going to review one of my personal favourites, the brilliant Braindead from 1992. We will be talking about this movie in spoilerific detail from beginning to end. All of our favourite moments will be discussed and dissected, so to speak, on this episode. So if you haven't seen Braindead, please do give yourself a treat. Bring along a vomit bag, check it out, and then come back to us. Not only that, we've got a little bonus treat for you in the second half of the episode. I'm going to be joined by the brilliant Zoe Rose, also known as Zobo With A Shotgun, who is going to be telling me all about her new podcast in which she explores the history of extreme cinema. So we have a really good in-depth chat about all things extreme cinema and then end with an in-depth bonus review of Nekromantik. Now, usually at this point I would say go away and watch the film before listening to the discussion, but Necromantic is a different beast, and I find it difficult to recommend this to all, to be honest. So I would say don't feel like you have to watch the film before listening to our discussion. I think it's a movie that is not for everyone. So all of that to come, but let's get started with Braindead. So joining me to discuss this wonderful movie, one of my very favourite people. He's been on the podcast a couple of times before. He was last here at Christmas discussing Gremlins with me, and before that he was discussing Slender Man and all things viral folk horror. So pleased to have him back. He is a digital guru currently working at Warner Brothers. It is my great pleasure to welcome back to the podcast Alex Ayling.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I am extremely excellent, Mike. How are you?
Good. I am very good. I'm very excited to talk about this film this
me
week.
Too. When you texted me, I was like, do you really mean me to talk about Braindead? I feel like I've won the lottery.
I know. It's so much fun. I can't wait to get into this. First of all, I want to ask you a little bit about zombie movies in general. What do you think of them? Are you a fan of this subgenre?
I think zombie movies are probably one of the earliest subgenres that I really got into.
Oh, it really?
Yeah, I think because when I was getting into horror, it was like when I was at school, 18, whatever, that kind of thing, and I was well into the gore and the splatter and all that kind of stuff. And so clearly the zombie subgenre is where it's at when it comes to that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I remember doing a bit of research, not wanting to show my age so much, but it was pre-internet, before the internet got good, anyway, at least. And it was, so you had to do your research on what were the good movies, and there'd be the occasional feature in Empire magazine or something that would go through video nasties or something like that, and then I'd be looking through the Radio Times or whatever every week, for the films. I'd see all the films listed out, and then sometimes once in a blue moon, something like Zombie Flesh Eaters would be on TV or something, and you'd be like, oh my god, I've heard about this.
Yes.
But it was on at 2 a.m. or something, and it was probably a film that someone had to buy as part of a package deal of all other things.
Totally.
They've got to play it out to amortize the cost or something really boring and TV broadcaster. They don't realise.
You're now speaking of someone who's worked for the BBC and various companies
and
like
all
that.
sorts of satellite and TV companies.
Yes.
I think last time I was here we talked about Bravo. I ended up working for Bravo.
You did, yeah.
which is where I first saw Evil Dead 2, which I think was a similar thing. But,
Bravo had a lot of good horror movies back in the day,
and I think
they?
you probably like go to a distributor and buy 50 movies, and you really buy 50 movies because there are 8 good ones that you're going to put on in prime time, and then the rest you've got to pretend you've got an interest in, and then tell the accountants that you're interested in order to justify the cost, and then you play them out at 2 a.m, not little realizing there's an army of like angsty teenage boys who just want to see some people get cut to pieces.
And you're going to be changing their lives, and in like 30 years time they will still be talking about
exactly,
that,
right?
Seeing them growing up. And I feel like that has been a recurring thing with these zombie movies, especially a lot of these 80s and early 90s ones. People, they all have these, like, we've had a lot of these conversations where it's like they were kind of notorious Evil Dead, video nasty, zombie flesh eaters, and kind of their reputation preceded them almost, I think, for a lot of people. And I think Braindead is a bit for like
sure.
that too, right?
And it was almost like a rite of passage, or this was in the days when you'd have like lots of sleepovers. I was in the suburbs and people didn't live that close to one another, and so you just have sleepovers, and then you'd always want to find a film like this that you could all put on and be like, whoa, all together, lads.
Exactly. It is one of the ultimate watch with your mates films, I think. This definitely.
Oh, and this for sure.
Yeah.
Braindead.
What is your strategy for surviving the zombie apocalypse?
So, I knew you were going to ask me this, and I feel like we were just talking before the mics went on. We were just talking about Game of Thrones, and we were talking a bit about Harry Potter. And I feel like in those two franchises, I'm one of the most obvious Gryffindors you will ever find.
Interesting.
And I would say that I am also like one of the most obvious Starks. Like, not Northern, but in terms of like honor and do the right thing and all of that. All of which lines me up for an extremely early death scene.
Yes, you're fucked.
So I'm basically going down in the first act.
Right,
That's what's going to happen. I'm going to make a noble sacrifice so that somebody else later, like the beta male or I'm a beta male really, but like that someone, the unexpected hero of the movie will come through and save the day in the end. The other upshot of me getting killed off early is that I actually make a really good zombie. So I'm going to come back and then also be the thing that, then you've got to face your fears. Is it still the person they were before? Someone's got to then, through their tears.
Yes. Somebody as lovable as you, Alex, to see you turn into the undead.
Someone's got to destroy my brain or remove my head.
I wouldn't be able to do it.
No, well, this is the problem, right? And this is why I'm an excellent person to kill off in the first act. So that's why I haven't really thought about my zombie strategy, because I know I'm probably just going to end up saving some hapless child who's got left behind, and I'll be like feeling like I'm doing the noble thing and then ending up dying, getting bitten.
What do you think of kind of just zombie movies right now, like the ones we're still getting quite a lot of them, Train to Busan and obviously The Walking Dead and all these kind of things. Do you like sort of still keep up with all of this stuff?
I don't get excited about zombie movies anymore.
Right, exactly.
There's too much noise, but I think what's nice about something like the evolution of horror community is that you can quite easily find out if there's a good one.
Yes.
Like
you've got to rely on recommendations.
Yeah, you absolutely have to rely on recommendations from people.
Yes, a good one. If you haven't checked it out yet, One Cut of the Dead. Go and see it.
No, I know. I definitely wanted to go and see it, but all the times it's on, it's like inconvenient for me to get to the Prince Charles at 4 p.m. on a Thursday.
It's a nightmare. I mean, it's surely the sort of film I think it will end up streaming very soon, I imagine, and definitely worth a watch. Okay, amazing. Well, let's get into the brilliant Braindead.
On this picturesque block, in this manicured home, something evil, something terrifying, something horrifying is haunting Lionel. His mother.
I thought I told you to spray this house. The place is infested with vermin.
Although she was a little strict,
Look at this dust. It's an inch thick.
he never wished her any harm.
You look after me like that.
Until
Your mother's dead, Lionel.
now, whatever Mom's got
Who's your mother?
has caught on with the neighbors.
She's been bitten! You know what that
We open on Skull Island, which is interesting.
Yes, yes.
So we open on Skull Island, and there are some, let's call them very colonial types. Actually, we don't open on Skull Island. We open on a shot of the New Zealand flag, and then the Queen on a horse.
What is that?
Well, I think it's playing into the whole colonial thing, right? And it's playing into the that's part of what one of the subtexts of this film is all about.
Yes.
So anyway, there's these couple of white dudes on Skull Island, which presumably is somewhere in the Pacific.
Yes.
And they capture a Sumatran rat monkey. And then this Sumatran rat monkey ends up in a zoo in Wellington, in New Zealand. That's kind of what you need to know about that.
Yes.
And then eventually we meet our protagonist, Lionel, who is...
Lionel?
I mean, talking of beta males.
Yes, I know.
He's the ultimate. So he still lives with his mum and is very downtrodden by his mum, but... has a meet cute with a grocery person who works in a grocery shop called Paquita, and she is told by some tarot cards that they are destined to fall in love, and so they go on a date to the zoo, and Lionel's mother is following them and hiding in a bush and gets bitten by the Sumatran rat monkey. Now, previously on Skull Island, we don't know what happened, but every time you get bitten by this thing, all the islanders shout something like, Singaya, and then chop off your arm. Yes. So anyway, she gets bitten. Things are looking bad. Eventually, she dies and then is not dead anymore. And Lionel has to try and keep this fact from the rest of Wellington for as long as possible. Spoiler alert, he does not do such a good job.
He does not, yes.
Yeah. And that's basically it. And then, she kills the monkey, so she becomes patient zero, effectively.
Exactly. Brilliant. So, first of all, what do you think of this film?
I mean, it's a 5-star fun fest for me.
It's a 5-star for me as well.
I absolutely love this film. We were saying earlier, I haven't watched it for maybe 15 years. I don't know why I waited so long.
Honestly.
What a joy.
Yeah.
It's just so good in so many different ways.
Agreed.
There's so much to love about it.
It's phenomenal. It really is phenomenal. And not just in one of those kind of low budget cult fun movies that people
good.
Like us might like anyway. Yeah. I genuinely think it's masterfully made. It is brilliant. There's so much to appreciate. Let's start this conversation by talking about Peter Jackson, because obviously this is Peter Jackson, right? And he not at all known for making films like this anymore, sadly. But just him as a director and sort of retrospect of everything he's done since. Are you a fan of his work?
In general,
yes.
I am a fan of his work, and I think he has got an incredible eye. He's incredibly talented. If you just think about this film alone, in the credits, I made a note, he's listed as director, model maker, stop motion, actor, and co-writer.
So good.
In all of this. He is incredibly talented fellow. He has got such a singular vision, and he can somehow manipulate this celluloid in ways that I've not seen other people. And if anybody else tried to do the things that he does, it would be so cheesy and you just wouldn't get away with it, or they would go half-hearted. But he is he's clearly cinema just runs through his veins, and he just has got this I don't know, almost mystical talent to be able to shape the medium to do whatever it is that he wants to achieve. And for that, I will always be grateful. But I think in general, then yes, I'm a big fan. And I think he probably works best when he's an underdog.
Right, yeah.
And when he's against the system. So, Bad Taste, back where it all began, just making it on the weekends with your mates for 2 years or something. It took every weekend for 2 years. When you've got no budget, this film was a flop. And so then he came back with, I don't know what was next, The Frighteners came after this. Because it was bad. Next. I think it was Bad Taste, then Meet the Feebles, then...
Yeah, and then this. I can't remember if there's anything between this and The Frighteners, but The Frighteners was shortly after that.
And was that's a great film.
It's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah, we covered it very briefly on the Ghost series, actually, and it is phenomenal. Yeah.
And then, when he was appointed to be director of Lord of the Rings, I was like, do they mean do they mean that Peter Jackson?
Isn't it amazing? Isn't that amazing?
Because, I mean, I'm in, but I don't know why you thought that was a good idea, but I clearly,
We of course omitted Heavenly Creatures, which came in between. And how could we forget? Again, a brilliant
You
film.
think about that, like, right, so it's Braindead to Heavenly Creatures to The Frighteners.
Yeah, to Lord of the Rings.
That's
nothing
really
something.
from The Frighteners
That's
to Lord of the
really
Rings.
something, isn't it? Yeah.
I love the Lord of the Rings films, and
Yes.
I really, really appreciate his aesthetic in that universe.
Yeah.
I think it it fits really well. Like, let's not talk about The Hobbit. Because I think maybe that proves my point, right? I think
Yes,
Lord
that's
of the
where
Rings,
I thought you were leading to.
Lord
with
of
that
the Rings.
point.
Lord of the Rings. He's an underdog. Like, who is this guy? And then he made all the money.
Yes.
Won all the Oscars.
Yes.
For Return of the King, and then came back and was The Hobbit. It was like, oh, it's one film. Oh, it's two films. And I know he wasn't originally meant to direct them, and he had to step in at the last minute. So, and then it was like, well, let's make 3 films. And I think that's probably, not an underdog anymore. It's like, yes, Peter, do whatever it is you want to do.
Yes.
Have as much money as you want. And I think maybe that's where it got overindulgent and a bit much, because there's not enough story in that to cover those 3 films. Whereas in Lord of the Rings, you've got a surfeit of stuff.
It's weird how some of these, the incredible, like you said, he was involved in the stop motion and that kind of thing with Braindead, and maybe there's something about the CGI that's the problem with the Hobbit films, isn't it, as well? Because Lord of the Rings doesn't have, it feels like it has a good balance of practical and CGI, doesn't it?
Yeah, but I think also The Hobbit was at that point where everybody thought photorealistic CGI,
that horrible frame rate thing, did as well,
and 60 frames per second. The photorealistic CGI was the thing we were all chasing, and we almost got there, and then Avatar came out, and it made it even better, and it got better and better and better, and then everyone didn't realize that. That's fine, but it's not real.
Yes.
And you can see that in the performances, and you can see that in the, and mocap's doing a much better job because it's such a great mix of them. Yeah. You're right. I think there's something about Lord of the Rings which just feels really physical.
Yes, it feels tangible, doesn't it? It's that beautiful. It's all that New Zealand landscape and setting, isn't it? And absolutely, I think
it's like Braindead. Braindead. The one adjective I'd use for Braindead is wet. It's a very wet film.
Squishy.
Yeah, and you can't, wet is a hard adjective to describe any kind of CGI.
Yes, no, exactly that. You can't. It's funny how I feel like there's a few directors that have had this problem. I think Tim Burton started off so brilliantly in the late 80s, early 90s with some of his low budget. Again, like you said, maybe when he's kind of having to fight against the system a little bit to get what he wants, and then look at kind of some of the stuff he's made since becoming, and it's.
And you just think when you're a goth at Disney that no one believes in, it's fun. But when you're a goth at Disney that everyone believes in, it's less fun.
Exactly. And I've just less said about this new Dumbo film, the better as well.
I'm not going to watch it.
Yeah, I was forced into it, and it was not good. I do, however, love King Kong. I thought his King Kong was great. I know a lot of people had a problem with that, and I know some of the CGI does again look a bit clunky, actually, but I think he did a brilliant job at kind of just putting the story and the emotion on screen.
For sure, and that's his first love.
Yes,
King Kong, and that's why Skull Island is in Braindead, right? That's his first visit to Skull Island.
Exactly.
King Kong, let's not talk about that as well, because we could do a whole other podcast. But
one day we will.
I think it's a bit long.
It is,
for me.
Of course, it is a bit long. It is.
I agree. Anyway, I don't know why we started that.
Let's
but Peter Jackson in general, yes, I'm a fan.
You're a fan. Let's get back to the film itself then. At Skull Island, at the beginning, I mean, I think you get a kind of idea of the tone and the feel of this film straight away, don't you? It starts almost reminding me of some of those horrible kind of early 80s cannibal movies that are going to be really nasty and horrible.
If they had been made by Monty Python.
Yes, exactly.
It's a cannibal movie as made by Monty Python at the beginning. Almost literally that scene where they're chopping his arms off is it's from Holy Grail, right?
Exactly.
I'll bite your legs off.
Yeah, exactly. But straight away you get kind of horrible, gruey gore. And what do you think of the practical effects? Do you think they hold up?
I think they stand up pretty well, actually.
Yeah.
I think in this, I just spent the weekend catching up on my Evolution of Horror homework. So I
apologise.
It's good. I watched Day of the Dead and Return of the Living Dead, there's some good practical effects in there. But I think this is on a par, right? There's some good stuff, and it feels like I don't know how much offal they used and how much was just bits of foam latex or whatever, but it all feels horribly real.
It's genuinely, I think, nauseating, this film.
I think this is the only film I've ever physically gagged whilst watching.
Right, and I bet I know which
You know
moment
exactly
you're
which
talking
moment
about,
I'm
and I think
talking
a lot of people feel that way. I think it does have the reputation. I remember reading about it, possibly in Empire or Total Film, as when I was young, as being the bloodiest movie ever made in terms of the sheer amount of blood in it. Do you think that's the case? I mean, I know no one probably knows that for sure factually, but I mean, do you think it's the bloodiest film you've ever seen?
I think so. I mean, it's disputed on the internet because I remember it as the film that used the most amount of fake blood ever. Like, I don't know who has gone through the accounts, whatever. And there's some people saying the Evil Dead remake has taken over of that, but I think certainly from 1992 until 2013 or whatever that was, that's a long record to have held. And for sure, like, I don't remember seeing a film that is so slick with blood, and it's proper crimson, like actual blood-coloured blood, not your kind of Hammer horror scarlet, like bright blood. This is full-on actual, like, blood and guts gore. That you could imagine them like just pop down the butchers and get another couple of barrels.
Exactly, totally. I think it does owe a debt to some of the things we've talked about already on this series. I think there's a Fulci element. I think there's Fulci that made me feel a bit sick, some of those films, and definitely the Evil Dead, right?
The Fulci films make you feel sick because you're not sure which bits are actually real.
Yes, when they're throwing up like sheep guts and stuff. Yeah, it's so disgusting. And I think definitely Sam Raimi and Sam Raimi's style, right? I feel like is all over this. And Chris Hewitt actually says on Evil Dead, he said, without Sam Raimi, there'd be no Edgar Wright, there may be no Peter Jackson and a lot of these other people.
It's almost like a kind of Beatles and Beach Boys, like vying for each other, like who's going to outdo one another, and looking for each other, like a friendly rivalry sort of thing.
I think it's a difficult. It's not just a case of him copying Edgar Wright, because I think, like you say, it feels like he gets cinema in the same way that Sam Raimi did, and in the same way that the Evil Dead, all these people do, and I think in the same way that the Evil Dead felt alive, this feels, every element of the filmmaking feels so alive, and it's that crazy camera moves, and everything's a bit kind of off the cuff. And
I don't know how he can get away with so many Dutch angles. Him and Sam Raimi are the only people I know who can get away with that many Dutch angles and it not be like annoying or cheesy or
It's
and you
so
just
true.
every time there is one, you're like punching the air. It's
so
a great
good.
moment.
It's so good. So obviously we're introduced to our main character of Lionel. What do you think of Lionel and this lead performance?
I mean, it's up there, right? I think it's Bruce Campbell meets Buster Keaton. It's physical.
Yes.
It's extremely physical. I mean, one of the first times we see him, he's walking backwards out of a grocery store and he almost gets run over by a tram that's going extremely fast. That is a not insignificant stunt that he's pulling off. And, but he makes it look effortless and it makes it look like natural and naturalistic. And, in a film this big and this outrageous, you kind of need a really broad performance at the center of it. Otherwise, you're going to be playing second fiddle to all the effects, and like some of the stuff that happens at the end is like it threatens to make you forget everything you've ever seen in films before, let alone in the past 90 minutes. And so I think he absolutely has to do this big broad comedy thing, and there's parts where he's like running on the spot, and it's just I think he's great. And it's so like, I don't know if I've ever seen him in anything else.
No, Timothy Balm. I'm just looking at his IMDb now. He's done very little since. Nothing really that stands out. Or he's done a lot of TV, maybe a lot of New Zealand TV shows and a couple of TV movies, but not much at all.
I quite like it. Like, that's it. That's like, once you've done once you're the lead character of Braindead, maybe that's like it. That's enough.
It. And it's it's the same sort of sad fate a little bit for Bruce Campbell too. Bruce Campbell's done a bit more, but again, maybe these performances again, they have more in common, like you say, with Buster Keaton or something like that, and almost they're not of their time.
But at least Bruce Campbell was best friends with Sam Raimi and could bag cameos in all his films when Sam Raimi went to Hollywood, I guess.
Yeah, I know.
Lionel didn't.
Jackson, he could have given him some Hobbit roles.
Lionel
or something.
could easily have been like a shit elf.
Yes,
like if you ever needed a shit elf in the background.
Exactly.
They used Brett McKenzie from Flight of the Conchords as an elf, didn't they?
Exactly. Yeah. I feel like there's a few people in New Zealand films that will just be reused.
They'll just keep popping up again and again.
I mean, actually, I think there is a. I'm a big fan of most New Zealand-made horror films, and I think they pull off this sort of tone really well, this tonal balance of kind of absurd comedy and horror, right, and nastiness.
Yeah.
They seem to do it really well. Movies like Black Sheep and
Black Sheep I loved. Have you seen Deathgasm?
Yes. Brilliant.
That's the other one that I saw recently, and I was like, this is just
Nuts.
like probably only New Zealand would make this film.
Right. That's it. It is so unique,
Yeah.
isn't it? The style. It's really interesting. And Housebound. Have you seen Housebound?
I haven't seen Housebound.
It's wonderful.
Is that
Absolutely
good?
brilliant. And again, a perfect balance of comedy and horror. It's really good. Yeah,
And of course,
really
you've got
good.
What We Do in the Shadows.
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is just a brilliant. Which I hope you'll be covering on your vampire season
Of
when it
course.
eventually comes.
Of course. There's a TV show as well, isn't there
Yes,
now?
I haven't seen it yet.
No, I'm excited. Do you think this pulls off? Again, we've talked about this a little bit with Evil Dead and stuff. It's a very difficult thing, isn't it, to get kind of comedy and horror right in equal measure. Do you think this does that? Or is it even trying to be a kind of scary horror film?
I don't think it's trying to be scary. Like I'm not terrified. You know,
No.
I'm not. Walking around the zoo looking a bit like, oh,
Those
that one looks
monkeys.
a bit. That one, like that one looks like it's stop motion. That's scary. I'm not doing that. I'm not looking askew at a lawnmower. Thinking like, oh, that's going to come back later. So no, I don't think it's scary. But I think there is something about comedy horror where you've got to commit to both.
Yes.
And you see, like Shaun of the Dead does. You know,
Yes.
you've got to commit to both. Both elements, and you can't skimp on the reasons why it's a horror film and it's a zombie film, and you've got to have those moments that are like are scratching that other itch as well as the comedy itch,
Right.
To because that's when the laughs come. It makes it that much more cathartic,
exactly.
and that much more fun.
I agree, and I think the actors help that. I mean, they are broad performances, but also what Timothy Balm does with Lionel is he still treats the situation as serious, even though he's doing it in his own broad way.
They don't know they're in a comedy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's important too.
Yeah.
I think,
There's no mugging to the camera.
no, not really. Although possibly the uncle character at times.
Oh, well.
But I
Uncle
love
Les.
him. I love Uncle Les.
Jeez, Uncle Les.
What about this very important relationship between Lionel and his mother? I mean, I feel like there's all kind of Freudian elements.
This is what
to
I said to you, and you were like, "Do you want to come and do Braindead?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." So everyone else gets to talk about consumerism, or
Yeah.
like who's the real monster, and you and I
Exactly.
are going to sit here and talk about mummy issues.
Yes. I can't wait because I've been talking about fucking consumerism for weeks.
The apocalypse. I mean,
Yeah.
in a way, it's kind of quite a local apocalypse. You know,
Very.
it's a very what they call. I can't even remember what the WLWL stands for now. It's like the Wellington League of
That's right. Yeah.
Wellington Ladies, or there's
Yes.
something else. But it all feels very real to me. You
It
know,
does.
in that kind of.
It's a kind of Little Britain type,
Yes.
Little New Zealand
Yeah,
type.
I grew up in the home counties,
Yes.
and you can see this is sort of like a suburb of Wellington. I mean, Wellington, I guess, is not that big. It's not like London size,
No.
so it probably has that sort of villagey feel, and
Yeah.
everyone's in each other's business, and all of that just feels like that felt very lived.
Definitely.
As well, and that
Definitely.
felt very authentic, which again I think you really need when you're going to do a film this outlandish.
Yes.
You have to base it on some emotions and some situations that are going to cut through that and
Yeah.
that feel so natural and authentic.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely.
But yeah, Lionel's mum, she's a piece of work.
She's a piece of work. She's brilliant, isn't she? The classic nightmare, monstrous mother.
There's a beetle.
Hey?
There, under the fridge. Horrid little creature scuttled right in front of me. I thought I told you to spray this house. The place is infested with vermin.
I'll get onto it straight away, Mum.
Also, you mentioned at the beginning, colonialism maybe comes into play
Mm-hmm.
with this. Like, what do you mean by that? Do you think, because again, zombie movies in general, they always have these kind of subtext, like
Yeah.
we've mentioned. Do you think there is a bit of that kind of running through this then?
So I don't know how much of that is intended for the film,
Yeah.
or is just a byproduct of someone being from New Zealand,
Right.
and generally feeling bad about like white guilt, I guess,
Right.
that kind of thing. So I think, if you're living in Australia or New Zealand, and it's certainly in the 90s up to now, you're dealing with all those issues and those things of
yes, you're a bit more aware of it,
and you're more aware of it. And so I think that cheeky use of the Queen at the beginning is just, the more I think about it, the more like maybe Peter Jackson was cognizant of this kind of thing that was coming in. And there's the guy, God, I don't even know what his name is, the husband of the chairwoman of the Wellington Ladies League or whatever, and he comes in and he goes, "What we need is another war."
Yeah, he's amazing.
He's that guy, right? And there's so many of them. He's the guy in the scene with the thing.
Yes. I love trifle or whatever it is.
Custard.
Yes, custard. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You're going to play the audio now, aren't you? And make everybody feel sick. Well,
Custard? I haven't had a good custard in years. She never makes the stuff.
It's all about the sound in that. Let's talk about that scene. Let's talk about that scene.
Yeah, it's coming up. It's
coming up.
Literally.
This is
earlier in the film. She finds out that she's been nominated to be secretary or treasurer or
That's
some
right.
kind of position on the committee, and it's the greatest honor. And then she like has a conniption.
Yes.
Where she's like, "Oh, this place is a mess, Lionel. You have to clean up." And then in the intervening period, he goes on a date that she is not on board with, and then gets bitten by the monkey and then dies, and then is coming back to life. And then she's like in her bed and pussy, and like you don't know what's going on with her. And they turn up. And they're like, "Oh, God, it's the luncheon. Quick, get me ready."
Yeah.
And then she's like sitting at her dresser in front of the mirror trying to put makeup on, and then she, like,
bits just keep peeling
whole
off.
cheek peels off, and then they get that glue that you use in like primary school.
Yeah.
Careful, it'll stick on crooked.
Oh man,
It's amazing.
yeah. So anyway, then they go downstairs and they have what is possibly the most disgusting meal ever committed to film.
Yes, agreed. And there's the kind of the kind of pus squirting out of the arm and into the custard.
Even now, I'm thinking about it, and it's making me gag.
Right.
Damn fine custard. Rich and creamy, just the way I like it.
So this, I don't know what it's, because there's some disgusting stuff, right? I've seen people being fed their own eyeballs.
Yeah.
I've seen, like, as horror fans, you've seen it all. There's something about this scene.
Yes.
And I don't know quite what it is. I think it's the sound.
It's the sounds.
Okay,
It's the sounds.
I think it's the sound effect. And so they have this meal, and bits of her body are falling off. And then she's got a bandage wrapped around her arm, and they've got no pudding. And this guy who wants another war has demanded dessert. And so Lionel brings in these 4 bowls of like custard.
that you can hear him go.
Right, here we go. There's some good Foley again.
Yeah.
Always bring you good Foley, Mike.
Exactly.
Brings in this custard, and then she moves her arm or something, and this almost pink pus squirts out into the center of the custard. You're not wanting to talk about this today.
It's making me feel like I'm a little bit delicate today, and it's made me feel a bit sick.
And then he puts the spoon in his mouth, and he's like, "Oh, rich and creamy,
just how I like it."
Oh, it's like that. It's like that one in that bit in Bad Taste as well, where they're passing around the bowl of set. Like, honestly,
exactly.
That same thing again.
Truly grotesque in every sense of the word. I mean, it is, and again, it's something we've talked about a lot so far on this series. The zombie movies, you get this weird mix of like absolutely kind of crazy gore, like Fulci kind of eyeballs and all that kind of thing, but then you get that kind of like Cronenberg-y body horror sometimes.
This is the worst thing in a whole film, which is full of some of the most inventive and amazing gore and death and destruction scenes I've ever seen.
Yes.
This is the worst bit.
It is
someone eating some custard.
Exactly, because I think, the last act is one of the most genius things I've ever seen in my life, but that violence in the last act is like watching a brilliant Looney Tunes cartoon or something. That's what it reminds me of. Whereas this is something so grotesquely real in a weird way. It is, Oh,
and then you think that's bad, and then her ear falls off into her own custard, and then she eats her own ear, and it's the gristly munching sound. You're going to play another audio clip.
I can't wait. I can't wait.
touchy on the old food front, eh? Never mind. That was a fine meal, boy.
Thank you, Mr. Matheson.
I mean, that's iconic. I think that's the only time I've ever felt physically sick watching a film where I've had like gagged.
This is definitely up there. Pus. No one needs pus in a movie.
No, especially when it plops on like a bit of strawberry jelly.
So
let's move on.
Let's move on from that scene.
Rich and creamy, just how I like it.
Oh my God, it's her. Just let it ring. I saw the bags, Greta, and I never want to see you again. She's really freaking me out. This is not a problem.
Public area, her rights are protected.
Why are you doing this?
How exciting.
Hi, I'm Frances, and I'll be your waitress for the evening. No, I can't do this.
Hello everyone, just interrupting this chat momentarily. Now that was a clip you just heard there from a new horror movie called Greta. Greta is directed by Neil Jordan and it stars Isabelle Huppert and Chloe Grace Moretz. It's a story of a young woman in New York who runs into, sort of by happenstance, an older woman, and they become friends, but then it turns out that perhaps this older woman is not quite what she seems, and I will just leave it at that. It's a really interesting thriller, sort of reminded me, it feels like a bit of a throwback to the sort of early 90s sort of female-led thrillers that we got, such as Fatal Attraction and Misery and Single White Female and movies like that. And it's directed by the brilliant Neil Jordan, who, in case you don't know of him, I'm sure you would have seen some of his biggest films. He directed Interview with the Vampire. He also directed The Crying Game, one of my personal favourites. Now, I got the chance to actually sit down and interview Neil Jordan about Greta and about his relationship with the horror genre. So, if you are a patron of the Evolution of Horror and you donate your $5 or more per month, you will have access to that interview right now. You can find it on our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/evolution of horror. And if you're not a patron yet, but you want to catch this bonus content, you want to listen to my interview with Neil Jordan, or maybe our review of Jordan Peele's Us, or a review of Pet Sematary, the new one, or a review of A Clockwork Orange, which came out last week. There is tons of really interesting bonus content with all different guests available for anyone who donates and helps us to defray the costs of making this podcast. Simply go to patreon.com/evolution of horror. And on that note, I want to give a very special shout out to everybody who has donated their $5 over the last couple of weeks, including Daria Hale, November, Cosmo Ghoul, Quidon Hugh, apologies if I pronounced that wrong, Joshua Bohannon, Anthony Hunt, James Hawkins, Jamie Swan, Dunny Salford, Ross Gardner, Christopher Hammond, Nick Dillon, Jamie Holmes, Stephen Dowell, and Ross Gardner. A huge thank you to all of those people for donating their hard-earned cash to help support the costs of making the podcast. It's hugely appreciated. And one more time, if you want to join those guys, if you want to become a patron of this podcast, get treated to lots of bonus content, get a special shout out in a future episode, and get sent a sticker, simply go to patreon.com/evolution of horror and donate now. That's patreon.com/evolution of horror. Now, let's return to our discussion of Peter Jackson's Braindead. What do you think of this central kind of romance, I suppose, between Lionel and Paquita?
I mean, it's very thinly drawn.
It is. It is.
It's almost not there.
It's so funny.
I mean,
and it's always accompanied by this like romantic score.
Like they're trying to make it happen.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Well, she doesn't even believe it until there's the kind of moon and the stars and like the grandma with the tarot cards.
Yes.
And she like, the grandma as well. It's like she reads half her fortune.
Yes.
And she says, oh, here you go. Here's this is going to say, you're going to fall in love with this man.
Yeah.
And then Paquita's like, and then what?
Yeah.
And it's like she's turning cards over and they say oppression, failure, debauch, defeat, sorrow, death. Nothing. It's fine. You don't need to worry about that. You just be happy.
It's so good. So
like,
funny.
Why would you do that?
No. And she's a bit underserved, Paquita's character, isn't she?
Yeah.
She's just kind of in there as an extra character, really.
Well, and then, there has to be somebody to have some empathy at the end, because Lionel is not going to do it. He is so oppressed. Like his Damascene moment is not until the very, very end when he finally has his cathartic, realization. But she has it a bit earlier, and she's got her mate Rita, and they do that whole thing in the kitchen. But I think she's not given a lot to work with.
No, she's not. I suppose she's a good device as well for the kind of like challenging his relationship with his mother, I suppose, isn't she? She's the obstacle that the mother is not happy about, kind of thing.
And she's her own woman.
She is.
Well.
She is. Yeah,
she doesn't care about the
she's
mother.
Good, and she's she kills some zombies towards the end. As well. She does well. Well, let's talk about the zombies themselves in a kind of zombie context. I mean,
that's a good point, Mike. I want to ask you, what are the rules?
What are the rules of zombies?
Of the zombies in this film?
I don't know,
No, neither do I.
Is it that they bite each other and... Yeah, it's biting each other infects...
I think so.
Yeah, well, that's what happens with the monkey at the beginning, right?
There's biting, but then the pus in the thing, we don't see him again, so we don't know if he turns from eating her blood, which is effectively...
No, I reckon.
But then also, how do you kill these zombies?
Yes, well, yeah. You just have to dismember them enough to the point where they're no longer a threat.
Yeah, because... There are some things that aren't even people by the end that are zombies that are still going, and it's not like this is not a destroy the brains and remove the head situation.
Not at all.
These are not Romero zombies.
No.
So I'm at sea.
It's true.
I don't know what the rules are.
And I guess it's much more of the kind of infection thing than just randomly this is happening everywhere. People are rising from the grave, kind of thing.
Well,
it's
in some ways actually like this is one of the rare cases where you know exactly where it's come from.
Yes.
And they explain exactly how it's happened. Yes. Whereas quite a lot of the times it's like, oh, we think it's a meteor.
Yes.
Or some people have been doing experiments.
Exactly. This is...
Just hear it on the radio in the background or something.
It is, I mean, obviously tonally could not be more different, but... more similar to 28 Days Later, which starts off with monkeys, and you see where it begins and how it spreads through, I'm guessing, bodily fluids or bites or something and kind of progresses from there. Yeah. They're peas in a pod, those two movies.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, what a great double bill that would be.
Exactly, that would be great.
I'd watch 28 Days Later first.
Yes, absolutely, and then that's a better late night one. It's the better second movie, definitely. Braindead. Sure. And what I love about this as well, which I'm sure we'll get into, as you mentioned, characters like the vicar, etc. I love that these zombies. You can have your favourite of these zombies, right? You've got the baby, you've got the mother, you've got these other ones you were talking about. I think you've got these like very memorable zombie characters as characters. You know?
And actually that's true. Like they get to have personalities and do things. Like they. So there are a lot of zombie tropes in this movie. Like you see that they are very much undead and they're very much not the person they were before, but they've carried some of the characteristics through. Yes. And so you've got the priest who becomes this really randy zombie, and you imagine like is that because he was chaste when he was a priest, and so he's letting it all out now. And you've got like, you can see these people who are carrying through, and then the zombie baby as a result of that. Like that's the other thing. Like that's a very quick gestation.
Brilliant. The zombie baby is amazing.
The zombie baby is like it's the only one that survives to the end as well, right?
Yes.
Because even Peter Jackson is not going to kill a baby.
It's that great scene in the park as well. I enjoy a lot of it, and I'm sure this is for budget reasons maybe, but a lot of it up until the final act is set just kind of in the stark daylight as well. A lot of this kind of horror, which is again quite kind of fearless, I suppose.
The thing about the playground is that they finished early and under budget, and so they had 2 extra days to film the playground scene. Oh my God. And so that's why that one suddenly has got different lighting and it looks really great. So and there's all this and they looks like they've rehearsed it, and the whole thing is just a whole another level of set piece.
It's so good. That also has a bit of a Monty Python vibe to me. There was a famous Terry Gilliam animation of somebody pushing a baby's pram, and then people going, "Oh, how cute!" and looking in, and then this baby kind of and gobbled them up. It kind of reminded me a bit of that.
Exactly that.
Yeah,
exactly that.
Do you have any favourites? We've talked about a couple of them, but do you have any favourites of all these kind of undead characters?
I mean, I think the animated pile of intestines that uses an anus for a mouth and admires itself at what I think it's got kidneys for ears or like eyes or something. That digestive tract that moves around on its own, admires itself in the mirror and occasionally farts.
Yes.
I think has got to be up there.
It's just genius.
It's like,
so good.
And there's some good puppetry. There's the bit where it's using its kidneys to hoist its own intestines up.
Yeah.
And it's like hand over fist.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's just amazing. There's just so much imagination to this.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like all the ideas, and he'd got just enough budget to make these ideas. It's like any crazy idea I have, I can make.
Yeah, to realise them on screen. It's just amazing. It's so good. Anything else you want to mention before we get to this kind of final act, at least? Anything else that we've missed? I think we've covered
everything. You've got Uncle Les is the guy who comes in and wants the inheritance, right? And
yes.
So he's just a boorish, over the top,
brilliantly kind of grotesque man.
We've done the playground scene.
Love the playground scene.
Yeah, that was good. Well, there's that other dinner party. So you've got the first dinner party, which is the lunch.
Oh, right, yes.
And then you've got the other dinner party, which is all the zombies, and Lionel's like feeding them dog food or something. I don't know what it is. And they're all, and the guy Void, like sticks the spoon through the back of his head.
So good.
And then Nurse McTavish is trying to eat, but like things keep coming out of her neck hole.
Yeah.
And so Lionel has to flip her head back and just pour stuff down the throat. I mean,
so good.
It's so good.
Some of it reminds me of what we talked about last week was Death Becomes Her, which came out this same year, obviously. Such a kind of different, glossy end of the scale in some regards, but just, again, some of those kind of really comedic visual gags and ideas, like Goldie Hawn sitting down and the pole going through her, and again, Meryl Streep's kind of head flopping back and forth and all that kind of thing. There's just so much comedy to be had with these kinds of zombie premises.
Yeah, absolutely. It lends itself to it perfectly.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about that final act then, where I will never fail to be amazed and impressed at just the scale of it and how long it goes on for.
It just keeps going. It never outstays its welcome.
No.
It's like Peter Jackson is thinking like, I might only ever make one zombie movie, so I'm going to do everything I've ever wanted to do.
Yeah. Everything you can possibly imagine happening in a zombie, like every gory scenario you can possibly imagine happens in this, like what feels like about 30-minute sequence.
Maybe he ruined it for everyone else.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the problem.
It's like it's peaked.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we basically don't get another decent zombie movie after this until 28 days later, like 10 years later.
Oh, well,
so there you go. It's phenomenal, and it's been a while since we'd both seen this, obviously, and I remember this scene obviously having a lot of excess in terms of blood and guts and viscera and deaths, but I don't remember it being this epic.
It was so good.
It's so good.
I loved it so much.
And it just keeps going.
It just keeps going. Every time you think it's over, they find a new room.
Yes.
And now we're outside.
A new room, new characters.
And now we're here, and now we've got, and now this is happening. And now that we're down in the cellar, and then we've got Mega Zombie, and then,
Mega Zombie Mum is brilliant.
Mum.
Why is she Mega Zombie? Why is she bigger?
I was going to try and think of a reason, but to try and apply logic. Why bother? Why ruin it?
I love that moment you mentioned earlier when Lionel is kind of running on the spot.
Yeah, he's running on the spot on the blood. There's so much blood in this place that he can't move, and all the zombies are coming up. And I like we didn't talk slow versus fast. I prefer slow zombies.
Yeah.
I don't mind fast zombies. I think when used well, but in this movie, slow zombies work brilliantly.
Agreed.
And that kind of thing of just they're going to get you eventually, because in the real world, a fast zombie is going to get you like that.
Yeah,
you're going to be gone.
It's game over. It's too deadly, isn't it? And it's scarier. I think fast zombies are scary.
Yeah,
slow zombies have more comedy potential. That's the difference, isn't it?
Yeah.
I love that. I love that kind of him trying to run and then eventually realizing he can just stand on heads and guts as kind of stepping stones in order to get away from them. It's just brilliant. And again, it's the way in which different body parts are used for different gags and visual gags and that kind of thing.
I wrote down so many things that I saw in this.
What are some of your highlights?
So my highlights, The guy that punches through the back of someone's head and the fist comes through the mouth.
Yes.
The head that gets completely degloved.
Yes, and is that the one that then becomes like a lampshade?
No, that's a different one.
That's a brilliant. That's one of my faves.
That's great. So that's through the back of the head is like a light, and
Yes.
then she's there for the whole like next 20 minutes.
Yes,
like still struggling.
Yes.
And still a new like interior design feature
Just brilliant.
in the kitchen.
Incredible.
That's great. I like the bit where there's 2 legs that are completely meatless.
Yes,
Get stripped of their meat.
Yes, that's brilliant.
There's a bit where there's a hand that comes through the door and is holding onto someone, and the only weapon they've got to defend themselves with is a pair of nail scissors.
Yep.
And so they cut the hand off using nail scissors.
It's so gross. That's
which
so
is really gross.
Yeah, that's really.
There's the classic, Les just takes like someone's teeth out with pliers for no reason.
Absolutely no reason. Other than what else disgusting?
What other disgusting things can we do?
Yeah.
The guy Void pulls himself in half, and then his legs act independently, and then at that point, Paquita and Rita grab a leg each and tear his legs, and then use his legs as weapons. That I liked that bit. But I've got a special soft spot for the zombie whose head gets cut in half, like horizontally.
Yes.
And then for some reason, I don't even remember how it happens, he gets a garden gnome shoved in the top of his head, and then he's like a garden gnome-headed zombie running around.
It's just so good. It's so good.
The intestines. I talked about the intestines.
The intestines. I mean, like, I wonder how I'm sure there are probably featurettes and all sorts about how grueling this last sequence must have been to film. I mean, you hear all those stories about that with The Evil Dead, about how, the whole set was just sticky and smelly because of the fake blood. It's like, what must this have been like? Especially when we get to the lawnmower. There's just the sheer amount of carnage and blood and the volume of blood.
And he doesn't skimp on showing you the lawnmower blade.
It's
like
amazing.
Going down tibia and fibia and like everything, and then there's one point where they both like are really into it, and they've like reached, when you're having a really good day at work and you're in flow. They're doing that, except for zombie killing, and she's got the blender going.
Yeah,
and he's,
the blender.
And he's kicking her.
The bit when the baby tries to go in the blender and dodges it, and then like slowly drops again.
You've got that guy's half head who's like skating around like an ice hockey puck.
Exactly.
And then that ends up in the blender.
Yeah. Oh man, it's so good.
Honestly,
it's so good. I was gobsmacked by it, to be honest.
It's the perfect use of the cinematic medium.
It really is.
Like,
is.
how else would these ideas exist?
Yeah,
you couldn't write a book about them.
No, and I think the one thing you can know about Peter Jackson from looking at everything, he's kind of a bit like James Cameron. I think he's just so committed. Like, he will not do anything by halves, and you can see that in everything he's ever made. I think, can't you? It's just like, every time you think he's done as much as he can do, he will give you more and more and more. And it works so well in this particular film. I mean, he peaked here, I think, for me. But
well, there's a lot to be said for that.
Yes,
there's a lot to be said for that. I'm just sad that this film like tanked at the box office.
Right. Well, that's and that was going to be my next question.
It didn't connect at the time, because otherwise we'd be saying party's over instead of groovy, maybe there's that line that's so quotable. The devil is amongst us. I kick ass for the Lord. And there's just so many really great lines. Totally. No one will ever love you like your mother.
Yes.
There's so many great lines in this. Come to Mummy.
It is. You're so right. Why is it not as iconic as The Evil Dead? Because
I wonder if it's just people didn't go and see it.
Yeah.
And it just hasn't found maybe it's a distribution thing.
Well,
maybe if it wasn't backed.
It's really interesting. I wonder if this has something to do with as well the fact that it wasn't banned or video nasties. Yeah. I mean, you'd think this movie is rife for being censored by the BBFC, but apparently they almost decided to make it a 15 rather than an 18 because they thought the tone of it was so light.
Comedic.
It wasn't that disturbing.
Yeah.
I think eventually they did give it an 18, but it was completely kind of passed uncut.
Yeah.
And if you think, as it should have been, but actually back then you'd think that would have been something they'd have chopped to bits, really.
And that wasn't the same in America.
No, I bet.
So they cut it in America.
Did they?
They cut like 7 or 9 minutes or something from it.
Hell of a lot.
Which is a lot.
Yeah.
Of like injury detail, I think it was, or something like that.
Yeah.
But that's weird. Like, 'cause America, maybe it was the sex they cut. Maybe that was it. Because like, normally in America, it's the...
Yeah, that's true. They're not as bad about violence.
They don't mind the violence so much, but it's they're a bit more puritanical when it comes to sex and swear words.
Interesting, isn't it? Yeah, but I wonder whether at least over here it doesn't have that notoriety like we talked about at the beginning of this. That zombie flesh eaters did, or that Evil Dead did, or something. And I don't know. Maybe by then as well, it was right at the end of this wave as well. 1992, really, wasn't it? It was kind of a little bit past.
It's weird that it wasn't in the zeitgeist. So like, I think I remember seeing a poster for it.
Yes,
when I was 12.
Yes.
So now I've actually revealed my real age. But I was on a scout trip.
Right.
I was in the Scouts.
Of course you were.
Of course I was. Such an obvious
Such a
stark
scout.
Gryffindor.
Yes.
Yeah, I was obviously a scout. And we were taken to The Point in Milton Keynes, which was the UK's first multiplex. And I remember going there, and I can't remember what we saw back then. Like I could probably figure it out by looking at like what was around. But the thing that always stuck with me was the poster for Braindead, and I found it so I could show it to you because that's my theory about why it didn't get banned. So the original 90s poster, which I looked at and was just like, this looks great.
Oh yeah, that's a good poster.
That's not the normal poster. That's not the normal. Maybe you can link to it or something.
Yeah.
But that's not the normal. That's not the normal cover that you see on DVDs or anything like that. That's the thing that's in there, and you can see there is no red.
No, there isn't. On
that poster because that's a scene from the end of the film.
That's the lawnmower scene.
That's the lawnmower scene.
It's
on the
kind
poster.
Of a still from that.
It's a still, and it's sort of green and yellow.
Yeah,
and there's no red on it. There's no blood on it. Yeah. And like I know you've talked before about video nasties and how it was more often the marketing.
Right. Exactly.
That was the thing that got it. And so I'm wondering whether it just Mary Whitehouse looked at it and was like, oh, well.
That's fine.
Because she never watched any of the films.
Yeah,
so if she'd seen it, she definitely would have wanted to ban it.
Of course. Yeah.
So that was my first experience. And I will always remember looking at that poster and thinking like, what is that? And it was an 18. And I was like, how am I ever going to be able to see that? That is mad. And I can still remember the smell of popcorn, which is the first time I'd smelled the smell of a multiplex.
Right.
So I always associate the smell of a multiplex with seeing that poster. But then it passed out of my mind.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I went to university and my good friend Chris introduced me to the works of Peter Jackson with Bad Taste and then Braindead. And then I was like, where have these films been all my life?
I know.
We used to watch them so much. Like when we came home from the pub, we'd just slap one on and put it in. And it's perfect for that.
It really is. It's perfect.
And where have they been? Why are they not in the zeitgeist in the same way?
It's so interesting, isn't it?
Because of maybe it is the notoriety thing.
Maybe it is. Maybe it's something to do with that era. I feel like that's a bit of a funny era for horror at the early 90s, and there weren't as many kind of gems coming to the fore as much, but I don't know, it's a weird thing. And I only discovered them as well because of Peter Jackson, really. I think when he had that huge success with Lord of the Rings, suddenly you'd start to see in places like Empire magazine people going, did you know Peter Jackson started off making these schlocky sort of B movies, so really interesting. It wasn't until much later, and you kind of hear them through word of mouth and recommendations and that kind of thing. Really.
So how do you feel about what he's rumoured his next project is going to be?
What is that? I don't know.
So, he recently did They Shall Not Grow Old, which was the World War I documentary where he took black and white footage and colorized it and made it in 4K and all of that, and was this amazing thing where suddenly these soldiers look like real people.
It's actually incredible, that film.
And it's just the most incredible thing.
Yeah.
He is going to take those techniques that he learned and apply them to Bad Taste and Braindead.
What?
And make 4K versions of both of those films. That's apparently what he's doing now.
Oh, I don't know.
I don't know
about
either.
That.
But they're practical effects.
Yeah.
So it's not like the Phantom Menace,
yes,
where it's like it's too early for your CG or the special
when they
editions.
Did the three, the original
of Star Wars, which is now the only edition you can find.
I know. Yeah.
It's sad. But yeah. So. I'm sure he won't go full. Maybe he will go full extended edition, but on these things, I don't know. But how do you feel about seeing Braindead in 4K?
I'd rather not. I think part of its charm is it looks kind of grainy and a bit scuzzy. I think that's all part of it, isn't it? You do kind of, when it starts on that footage on Skull Island, you do suddenly go, wow, this is a a low budget grainy movie, isn't it? I mean, you can tell straight away from those opening shots, and that's all part of its charm for me. Bad Taste maybe because I don't have as much of a connection with that, and I think it was even more rough and ready.
Yeah,
right?
but I just don't know how Bad Taste is going to stand up, because like you're going to see, you can already see like people's legs sticking out the bottom of things, or maybe you could go in and fix that. Maybe that's what it's going to do.
Instead of going back and redoing those, why doesn't he just make a new horror film? Like I would love for Peter Jackson to now go back and make another movie like The Frighteners. Just another.
Do you know
kind
what
of
Peter
genre
Jackson
movie.
should do? He should take 6 months, go to Blumhouse, get $1 million, $2 million, like, and really constrain himself.
Yeah.
Maybe direct it under a pseudonym.
Yeah.
And then don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
And then it just comes out. And
Exactly,
it's
like a Cloverfield
Yeah,
type.
like that. But it's a new Peter Jackson horror movie that you didn't know was happening. It could drop on Netflix. Everyone could watch it all together.
Wouldn't that be amazing? Maybe this whole 4K thing is a ruse, and that's actually what he's doing. He's giving us a sequel to Braindead or something.
Don't give me false hope, Michael.
I know. You never know. I would love it. I'd love to see him return to the horror genre. Step away from Middle Earth, Peter, and come back to us. Amazing. Anything else you want to mention before we wrap up on Braindead? Any other thoughts? Any other comments?
I mean, we didn't even really get into the whole Oedipus complex of it, and Lionel returning from whence he came and then being reborn.
Of course.
He gets welcomed back into his mother's, what is by now ginormous womb.
Huge womb, yes.
And goes in and then like cuts his way out again and is reborn. And
it's brilliant. It's not subtle.
It's really not subtle. And I thank it for not being subtle.
Yes.
Like, good.
Yeah.
If you're going to do it, just do it well.
Yeah.
If you're going to go for it, and this film goes for it.
It really does. And I think, like we mentioned at the beginning, I think we both would regard this as like, I'm not one for, I don't usually like doing stars, but I've started, putting everything I watch now on Letterboxd, and I was like, this is a 5-star movie for me. I do think it's masterful.
I've gone the other way. Yeah, I think this is 5-star. So I've gone the other way. Like, occasionally I'll say 5-star rating. The other thing I try and make people do, which they hate, is I ask them for a binary rating. It's either a 1 or a 0.
Oh, good. I like that. That's good.
Braindead's an easy 1.
It's a 1, 100%.
It's an easy 1.
It's a 1.
Yeah, but like binary ratings is my new fun thing.
It's good. I like that. Yeah. That's good. I think I would just give everything 1. That's the problem. I think it would really take a lot for me to give it a 0. That's the problem. Alex, thank you so much. And final question, of course, what is your favourite zombie movie?
Oh,
you're not allowed to say Braindead.
I'm not allowed to say Braindead. I should have thought about this before. I have got an extremely soft spot in my heart for Shaun of the Dead.
Yeah,
I do love it. And I try not to regret anything in life, but one of my only regrets I've ever had is not taking 2 weeks holiday to go and be a zombie on that film, because I saw it early enough that I could have applied, but I was only just new to London. And I was like, oh no, I can't really afford to take 2 weeks where I don't get paid. I should have just done it. Like, you're only young once. I should have just done it.
You could have been on that poster or something.
I could have been on a poster. I could have been hanging out with zombie tyres from space.
Right, exactly.
Been great.
Damn it.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
It's
a brilliant film.
Let's say Shaun of the Dead zombie film. Let's say that.
Love it. Alex, thank you so much.
Oh, there's one last thing. You know I don't come on the pod without getting you a present.
Yes.
Every time.
Yes.
So there's a present for you again, Mike.
Oh, Alex. This is amazing.
You'll love this.
This is why I invite you on, really.
You'll love this.
Yeah, go on. Oh, my God. He's got me custard. Oh.
Rich and creamy, just how you like it.
That is ambrosia Devon custard. This is disgusting. Especially, I'm feeling a little bit hungover today. We've been talking about pus and bodily fluids, and now you've given me some ambrosia. Amazing. Thank you, I think, for that. That is brilliant. Alex, thank you so much. Where can people find you out there in the world?
Come and find me on the Evolution of Horror discussion forums. Come and find me on Twitter, Alex J. Ayling. Talk to me about horror movies.
Yes. A big thank you to the brilliant Alex Ayling. What a fun chat. What a fun movie. Now, it's not over yet, but be warned, if you think Braindead was particularly gross and horrible and disgusting and nauseating, you have no idea. The film I am about to talk about can definitely be considered extreme cinema. This is a movie that was banned in so many countries on its release. In fact, it's still banned in many countries around the world right now. now. A movie that contains scenes of murder, necrophilia, dismemberment, urination, for some reason, quite a lot of urination, and actually live animal deaths as well, which is pretty horrible. So just be warned, the stuff we're about to get into is intense. Listener discretion is advised. Here is my chat about Nekromantik and all things extreme cinema with the brilliant Zobo With A Shotgun. Hello, Zobo.
Hello, Mike. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. It's so good to finally have you on. Just for people who don't know anything about you, Zobo, tell me a little bit about you, what you like, what you're into, your tastes, your relationship with the horror genre, that kind of thing.
Well, my taste is probably not one for everyone. I'm very into extreme horror films. So some of the nastiest films that they have around is what I tend to watch. Can't say that I always enjoy them, but that's definitely what I've been doing. So write for my own website, Zobo With A Shotgun, covering lots of those extreme films. Also just released first podcast episode.
Yes, it's fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Everyone should seek it out. What's it called? Is it called Zobo With A Shotgun?
Yep,
podcast?
just Zobo With A Shotgun.
Perfect.
Keeping that because it's easy.
It's your brand. It's perfect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So looking at at the moment, I'm looking at the history of extreme horror films and where they started in kind of like a 3-part episode, and then I also look at some non-extreme horror films for other sites like Jump Cut, the Horrorist, and a few other places as well, and they're usually not quite as extreme, a little bit on the normal side.
Yes. Okay, so how did you get into this? Like, how did you sort of fall in love with not just horror but this like extreme cinema?
Well, actually, it was at university, so we kind of had a film project to do, and I was really into found footage films, like a lot, like huge. Yes. Still think they've got their own thing. Yeah. And I find them actually terrifying.
Yes.
From the point of view of,
Yes.
So I was researching them for an article, and I stumbled upon Cannibal Holocaust.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, well, this looks pretty nasty. Started researching, read, the full synopsis on Wikipedia, then started, looking up images. And I was like, okay, I'm going to ask my dad for that for Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
He said that was kind of like a messed up thing to do. But, anyway, I watched it, and it just kind of really intrigued me into this extreme side of horror, which I honestly had no idea even existed.
Right.
I think the most extreme thing I'd ever seen was like Evil Dead. To me, I was like, whoa, that's extreme.
Yeah.
So then I just started researching, and it took a while for me to kind of start watching those films because I was a bit scared. Yeah. And then at university, I did my dissertation on desensitization. Through horror films and violence, and I was like, okay, so now is the time I need to test it on myself. So I just went out and watched as many of the nastiest films I could stomach.
Wow.
And then ended up, and I think I actually after that took a couple-year break from watching anything because I was like, it's kind of damaging me a bit, but that's how I ended up there. So
oh my god! So I guess it's more that you're kind of interested in a kind of academic light, I suppose, more than it is that you just like to just sort of pop them on and watch them, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple that I find, like Martyrs.
Right.
I can watch that and enjoy watching that to an extent.
Yes.
Whereas there's some films where, that I've watched and it is, for research purposes or so I can review it or from the academic standpoint of kind of, looking at them, in a sense of film. I can't say that I go to them in terms of being like, casual
movie night
viewing. Yeah, I'm like, I have to be in the right mood.
Yes. What do your like sort of friends and family and your partner and people think of this? Do they share your tastes?
No, they think it is I remember once I shared something on Facebook, and my auntie called my dad. And asked if I could stop posting horrible things on the internet for everyone to see, and my dad was like, I don't follow her for that reason. So basically most of my family now don't have me on social media. I also urge a lot of my friends to not follow me on, like Twitter, for instance. I only have like 2 people I know in real life because They don't want to see it. And then there's my boyfriend who, poor thing, has had to sit through a few, and he usually halfway through goes, I'm going to go to bed. I'm feeling quite tired. But yeah, when I first told him when we first started dating, he was like, do you have problems? Yes or no, which, so fortunately funny. I can separate, but I try not to inflict them on him, but he's getting there slowly. He's intrigued, but
it's really interesting, isn't it? Because extreme films, they kind of are a genre, but they're kind of not really, and it's like a lot of people might not even differentiate them from just people who hate horror in general might kind of say we're all the same in terms of but what would you say is the difference, I suppose, in like the films that you're going to be podcasting about, for example? How are they different to movies like The Evil Dead, for example?
I think they push a boundary. They obviously cover kind of taboo issues. Like The Evil Dead has violence and gore, but it doesn't feature topics like rape and incest. And the extreme films, they take those topics that people don't want to talk about, people don't really like to even see or hear about at all, and put them in your face, often very over the top, as much as you can handle. And violence is always very high. Sexual violence is usually quite a running theme. Animal cruelty, things that hopefully no one finds enjoyment from. They're very controversial compared to horror, like some horror films. I think they just push people's boundaries to a point where you kind of go, I don't want to watch that anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And what is it about it that you find kind of interesting then to watch about them? What sort of struck you when you first saw Cannibal Holocaust? What was it that kind of about these movies that got you into them?
I think a big part of it is like the psychology of you watching it yourself.
Yes.
And being able to push yourself, what is the limit that everyone finds within these films where you go, do you know what, actually, I'm going to turn that off and I don't need to watch any more of that. And I think it's quite interesting to see how you react in your own person when you're watching a film. And, it was like when I was watching Cannibal Holocaust, I was almost disgusted with myself for watching it. And I think the hardest part is obviously the animal cruelty. And I think everyone I speak to says that aspect of it is where they kind of go, do you know what? That's the line where they don't want to see anymore. And that film features, rape, impalement, like a lot of nasty things, but it's the animals where everyone goes, yeah, no, I'm done.
It's so true. And I wonder now in 2019, do you think that that's all, I wonder if extreme, quote unquote, even exists? Because you can watch an episode of Game of Thrones and you're going to see a rape, you're going to see incest, you're going to see children being murdered and dismembered, So, like, is there anything that filmmakers can still do other than actual harm, which hopefully is not even legal anymore in movies? Is there anything more that we can do to create, quote unquote, extreme cinema? Or is that more of a product of its time, like movies from the 70s and 80s, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's maybe more of a product of its time. And I think, like even now you can go on the internet and, I mean, it baffles me that you can go and look at real gore things, which to me is completely, I went on a date with a boy once and he showed me a website and I called my dad and was like, please come and pick me up right now.
Yeah.
And he worked at the zoo, which really upset me.
Oh, God.
Because he seemed like a nice guy.
That's like the setup to one of these films, right?
Well, he was the elephant keeper, and I thought, well, he's got to be a nice guy.
Yeah.
Turns out he's into real gore, so...
Fuck.
But yeah, when you can go online and see those things...
Yes.
I think it is harder and harder for filmmakers to... But I guess they also often add, like... Game of Thrones does have rape and things, but it does draw a line at certain aspects, and perhaps it doesn't show it as much. It implies it.
You're right.
So maybe it comes down to, these extreme films, they show you every single detail of it, which is...
That's true. But
I do think it's getting harder and harder to be the most extreme and put something out there.
But then I suppose recently, I suppose that there are still a few movies that have that reputation, aren't there? Like... Human Centipede 2 maybe, and the Serbian film, of course, as well, which we were just talking about before. I mean, so I guess, there are still a few movies that exist with that reputation, right?
Well, there are, because it's like, obviously a Serbian film kind of holds the trophy.
It does,
it really
doesn't it?
does.
Yeah.
However, I recently watched Trauma, which I know...
I've not seen that yet, yeah.
I wouldn't recommend it. I'm just going to say that. But the director was kind enough to send me a screener, because I messaged him on Facebook and was like, I'd love to review it, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And 5 minutes in, and I would say the first 5 minutes are the worst.
And I've heard what happens in the first 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm okay. Yeah.
Well, my friends were like, oh, we know that because I watched it before work one day in the office before anyone got in, don't know why. And they came in, they were like, oh, what were you watching? And I was like, no. I was like, you cannot know about this film. No one can. No. And it was actually, I found it really hard to sit through. Like, I felt... I felt really dirty watching it, and I think some people are saying, it's the new Serbian film.
Yes.
And I wouldn't go quite as far, but the first 5-10 minutes, they're up there with a Serbian film. So that director found something to do that's worse than one of the notorious films.
Yeah, and I think tone often has something to do with it, because interestingly, and we'll get into Nekromantik in a minute, there's something about that film that I kind of find quite weirdly fun. I mean, it's not the same, is it, as watching, Martyrs or a Serbian film in terms of the tone and what the characters are being put through in some ways.
Yeah.
Mostly. I think maybe that's the other thing about extreme cinema, is that, often horror has lots of murders, but it does, I suppose, apart from things like torture porn, it doesn't always actually focus on pain. And trauma and that kind of thing.
And I think actually some of them kind of focus a lot on the psychological, like they play, that's the tone is yes, you have the violence, you see it, it's very real, but then you almost have that, they play on the psychological aspect, which actually really makes your mind think way too much about what's happening in the movie. Whereas if you have like a stabbing, of course it's horrible, but it's just, you think of a slasher, often it's like 5 seconds, they get stabbed, and you kind of go, oh, well, that was almost fun.
Exactly.
Whereas in some of the extreme films, they really play on it, and it's, they might drag that scene out for like a good 10 minutes, and you're sat there and you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to think about that laying in bed tonight, and that's where it gets nasty. Totally,
yeah, absolutely. So going back into the sort of mainstream end of horror, we've been talking about zombie films on this season so far for weeks. What are your thoughts on the zombie subgenre? Are you a fan of these types of movies?
I'm not a huge fan of zombies. I mean, when I was younger, I loved zombies because it was kind of the only thing I was allowed to watch that wasn't too, nasty or anything. And I think my parents bought me like zombie books, and then, there was like The Walking Dead and series like that started coming around, and I was like, oh, okay, zombies are fun. Yeah. And me and my friend were obsessed with Shaun of the Dead. Oh, yeah. So much so that we made a habit of trying to watch it at least 4 times a week. Wow. I mean, we were young. We had nothing to do. My hometown's very small. And we just loved it. And there was something, I mean, obviously it's a fun movie, but there's something, quite fun about zombies. Yes. But I think as I got older and discovered, the wide subgenres of horror, zombies became one that, like now if I see a zombie movie, I'm not drawn to watching it, to be honest.
It's so interesting how many horror fans I know that have said that. It's almost like zombie movies have gone too much into the mainstream or something. Like they've pushed over into even non-horror, maybe because of things like Shaun of the Dead and because of The Walking Dead that have become so huge that it's almost not like it doesn't belong to us anymore as horror fans or something.
You know what? I think it's that. And it's obviously, it's quite like an oversaturated genre. Yes. And there are some films that do it incredibly well. But it kind of feels like the mainstream took zombies and we've all gone, well, do you know what? You have your zombies.
Not cool anymore.
Because we've still got the ghosts and the weird shit over here, and they're just there with the zombies.
We're all going off and embracing like folk horror or something more niche again now. That's the thing, isn't it?
Because obviously horror's always been kind of like the niche genre, and it's always been like you're a bit of an outcast if you watch horror movies. So we hold on to that, and then when it goes mainstream, it's almost like, don't try and take the one thing I had that made me weird away from me. So
I think that's really true, because I think back in the 80s, zombie movies, you know, when you had Fulci and The Evil Dead and stuff, they were much more kind of, you know, more kind of cult video nasty, extremely kind of subgenre. And I guess it's the same with what happened. I know a lot of horror fans hated the kind of 90s slashers as well, because they became very glossy and, you know, suddenly Sarah Michelle Gellar was starring in slashers and that kind of thing. And it wasn't quite the same as those 80s, you know, ones like The Prowler and stuff like that. So yeah, I reckon there's a bit of that to it. But I think you're right also, there's just a massive oversaturation of them, probably.
Yeah,
that's
the other problem. There's so many zombie movies out there.
Well, we went
crazy.
and saw, didn't we, together a couple of weeks ago, Pet Sematary. I mean, there's another zombie film that's just
it is
mainstream.
actually a zombie film, and that's gone very mainstream, because I think, you know, a lot of people actually, I was talking on like a film group, and most people were saying they have not seen the original,
right?
But they were like, but I'll see the new one because it looks nice. And I was like, well, it's just because they made it look good, isn't it? I was like, you don't want to watch. Yeah, exactly. And, you know, like even some of my friends who don't like horror, they're like, oh, have you seen like World War Z? And I'm like, unfortunately, yes. And they're like, terrifying.
Oh no.
But they're like, it frightened me, and I'm like, oh, did it? I'm like, is that what scares you? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, you watch that by yourself. Like, that's scary, of course. So
do you find that you're desensitized these days? I mean, do you still get scared by horror films?
See, I went through a phase where I convinced myself that I was like, I could watch anything and it can be really gory, nasty or scary, and I'm absolutely fine. But the last couple of years, I feel like I've kind of gone back around, and now I can't remember. I think it was Us that I saw in the cinema, and there was one part where I was like, I want to cover my eyes, and I was like, I'm not going to, because I have a reputation to keep. I was like, but I was there, and I was like, I just need to find the popcorn. Like, where's it gone? You know? Yeah. And there's been some films that actually really like. I remember watching The Witch.
Yes.
And I didn't think it would be that scary. And I mean, I did watch it home alone when my parents had gone for like 2 weeks on holiday, and I was like looking after the house. And I remember like pausing it halfway through, wanting to go for like a cigarette. And I was like, no. I was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stay in bed. I was like, I'm going to close my door, lock it, and just stay here. I don't need anything.
Agreed.
So I don't think so. I think there's still... when a film gets it right, I can still be scared by something.
Yeah. And like you said at the beginning of our chat, are you finding that more extreme stuff harder and harder now, personally, to watch?
Yeah, because I think as as a teenager, I was like, oh, I think I'm invincible.
Yeah, of course.
You know, and I was like, everything's cool, you know, whatever. I don't care about anyone, anything. Yeah. And I think as I've gotten older, you know, things like I have 2 kittens now. Yeah. And when I watch some of the animal cruelty, I'm looking at them, I'm like, no, I can't. You know, I draw on a lot of more real life experiences and, you know, people I know or situations when I watch some of those movies. And I think I have a broader understanding of perhaps what they mean and how they would affect in real life if you take it that way. Totally. So when I watch some things, I'm just like, no. And also, you know, you see so much and then you're like, it's kind of like, do I need to see this again? Like,
that's what I find more sometimes. It's not so much that I get, you know, terrified by some extreme stuff, but sometimes I find myself kind of rolling my eyes at it a little bit at times. You get to that kind of jaded point where I think sometimes, and I think Martyrs is a brilliant example of one that I think is truly kind of transcendent and feels like it is making a point, I suppose. Yeah. And there are some filmmakers where I'm like, you are literally just throwing the most extreme things you can on screen just to get a reaction out of me.
100%.
You know?
I mean, some of the indie extremes that I've watched, I remember watching one and I actually didn't finish it because I couldn't, and it was just scene after scene. There was no story. I mean, it was a very kind of like artsy type thing, but I mean, it was just pure shock. You know, I think there was at some point like a homeless woman with a vagina that opens and talks with teeth and spits things out. And I was like, that's the point. I was like, do you know what? I'm good. I was like, I'm making dinner and I just don't want to see that. Like,
exactly. Oh, God. And we talked, actually, I did an episode recently with Brad about video nasties and that kind of thing. And I think he was saying, there are some things that even he hasn't watched or won't watch, like the kind of guinea pig movies and that kind of stuff. You've seen all of those, right?
Yeah.
You're so brave. You're so much braver than I am. Are they? Because again, there's one of these things. I think we talked about this, before we started recording with your podcast. I think it's going to be popular because I think people love hearing about these things without having to watch them themselves.
Yeah.
And I've read and seen pictures of movies like the guinea pig movies, and I've never actually watched them. Are they as bad as we think they are?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're bad.
Right.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, the most famous one is obviously Flowers of Flesh and Blood.
Yes.
And it is essentially just, I think it's either about 45 minutes to an hour, and it's just a man chopping up a woman on a table with the effects are fantastic for the time, which is obviously what kind of holds the merit, and, it has a lot of history. Like, Charlie Sheen thought it was a real snuff movie, reported it to the authorities. So, there's aspects like that play into it, but when you watch it, it's kind of, I was like, okay, yeah, it's grim. Yeah. And, you don't, there's no storyline. It doesn't give you anything. Like you said, with Martyrs, there's something there. Yes. Yeah, Guinea Pig is, towards the end of the series, they get hilarious. Yeah. I would actually say watch those because they're funny. Like, right. And they move away so much from, like, that kind of tone. They do just go, I don't know, it's like batshit crazy. Yeah, just mental stuff. Yeah. But yeah, they're awful. They're horrible.
Do you ever think that anything should be censored? Do you ever think that, for example, Cannibal Holocaust, that the turtle scene should be removed and never included on any copy of the film? Do you think that any films ever should be censored or not?
In terms of Cannibal Holocaust, obviously so my point often about the animal cruelty is I hate it, I don't like it. However, I read that apparently the tribe that they were shooting with, they actually hunt and eat those animals in their culture. So that was actually part of what is to them a very normal practice and is actually how they survive. And if you think about it that way, well, it's not that different to us kind of
filming a slaughterhouse or something.
Exactly. And I hate seeing that, but actually I'm a meat eater, so it's something that I need to, I can't say like, oh, you can't show that. So I think when it comes to Cannibal Holocaust, you have to look at it that way and go, yes, I'd rather not see that. However, it's not just for the reason of putting it in there to shock, that it actually served a purpose at that time. And I think when it comes to censoring, old films, no, because it's been and gone, and what's the point if you remove the turtle scene? It kind of stops it from being what it is and how it gained its famous status. I guess even when it comes to recent films, though, I don't believe in censorship. No. I believe in giving it the right classification and making sure that people that shouldn't see it can't view it, because obviously it's, like my younger brother, he's not 18 yet and he turns 18 and he's got a long list of movies that he's lined up that he's going to watch when he's 18. And that's purely because, my dad said to him, you just can't. There's just tones in there that until you're 18... you can't watch, and even me, there were some horror films that I did not watch until I was 18. Totally, and I think it's not until you're that age that you can actually watch them. So I don't believe in censoring it. I just think it shouldn't be accessible to people that shouldn't be seeing it.
Totally. I think you've got to, and I think it's sometimes important to kind of know what you're in for when it comes to like real animal cruelty and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think,
I read a really good article the other day by B on Twitter, and she was basically talking about being really triggered by Lords of Chaos film. Oh yeah. Which has got some really nasty and brutal depictions in it, and she was kind of saying for her that's a subject she wouldn't like to see, and she wasn't expecting to see kind of like suicide in the film. And I responded and said, I thought there were lots of reasons why it should be in the film, of course.
Yeah.
However, I said, maybe there needs to be trigger warnings for certain things that actually for some people it might even cause, trauma. It could be something and if you don't know and it doesn't say this includes this, how you have no idea, right?
Oh, you're so right. And actually, that's another recent example, right? I mean, I don't know whether I'd necessarily call it extreme, but I've talked about this already on the podcast, but I've been to 2 screenings of this film, once at London Film Festival last year and once at Glasgow Fright Fest. Both times, during that suicide scene, somebody has fainted / had some sort of episode. So maybe that.
Well, I do think that scene's quite actually
powerful.
It's pretty hardcore, and that's coming from someone that's watched a lot. I wasn't expecting it. I was like, it's quite. I mean, I actually watched that film the other day. I went to see it with my dad, and my dad was like, he was like, I didn't think this was going to happen. I was like, it's quite. So it's
a phenomenal film, though, right? I mean,
I think it's my current obsession.
It's stunning. Yeah.
I mean, it's an
Rory Culkin
amazing.
Yeah,
I'm currently obsessed with Rory Culkin, as everyone can tell. I'm like I don't know, lost my mind a bit. But.
He's brilliant, I agree. And I think there's another reason why that, I mean, there's lots of reasons, I suppose, why that particular film is quite disturbing. And because it's true, maybe it's based on truth. And also there is, just because of the way of how well it's performed, and there's kind of, because for me there's another scene towards the end, I won't spoil it, that I found even more distressing and disturbing. And I think that's just because I was so emotionally invested as well.
I mean, you go on a
really
journey,
sad.
Actually, I think the first time I saw it I cried,
and
I was with a friend that I know quite well but not like super well, and I was there and I was like, okay, I'm just gonna like, the lights came up and I was like, I'm fine, I need to go home now. I was like, I'm not crying, I'm fine. It's a very powerful movie. Very powerful.
It is, because there is some extreme movies where I think people's natural reaction is to laugh because it's so extreme. I think that happened when I saw a Serbian film with people, that there was almost laughter at the kind of, oh my god, this is the most overtly, and same with Human Centipede movies and stuff like that. Whereas there are some, again, Martyrs and Lords of Chaos, where I think it almost hits you on an emotional level as well as disturbing.
And you don't laugh, you are just kind of there, and it's like, okay, I'm just going to be quiet and take this in. But like you said, there's been some extreme where I'm sat there laughing, kind of, it's almost like a cry laugh, where I'm like, ha, ha, ha. But, it gets you through it.
Yes.
Whereas, and the tone is almost so extreme, you can kind of go, I'll laugh at that. Because it's not real.
Yes,
so.
exactly. Amazing. Let's get into, then, a little discussion of Nekromantik.
So Nekromantik follows a man called Rob, who works at Joe's street cleaning agency, and he cleans up dead bodies from, well, not murder scenes, but death scenes. And whilst he's out one day after a man has a very strange death, he's apple picking and his neighbour accidentally shoots him. Very strange. And he dumps the body in a river where it begins to obviously decompose. So Rob and his team go and collect the body, and Rob decides that instead of bringing his girlfriend flowers, he's going to take her home the corpse.
Yes.
Of course, I mean, what else would you want?
Yeah. Little present.
And his girlfriend Betty is absolutely delighted with the corpse, and they begin to indulge in a love triangle that becomes a very heartbreaking tale of romance.
Yeah, absolutely. So what is your relationship with this film? You're a fan, right?
Yes, surprisingly a big fan. I think it's a movie that just, I have a good friend actually in Germany, and it was his suggestion to watch this movie when we were having a conversation about censorship. And I watched it and I was like, okay, I love it. I was like, it's amazing. I don't know. I was like, it's kind of bad in some ways, but I just love it.
Yeah, you've got a Necromantic tattoo, haven't you?
Yes,
amazing,
I have.
Amazing.
Which is really disapproved by everyone right now. Everyone was like, oh, because I told them I was going to get some flowers done, and I came back with a Necromantic tattoo. It has flowers, but it's
It does. What is it then? Why, first of all, do you love it? What is it that you like about it?
I think it's quite a fun film to talk about. And, you know, what you're kind of talking about, like tones earlier, is I feel like it's not a super serious tone.
Yeah.
I mean, it comes across, you know, it is a serious film in some ways, but it is quite fun and it is over the top. And, you know, it's one of those older extreme films as well that, I mean, it was made purely to kind of rebel against like censorship in Germany. Right. So it's almost like a, you know, rebel against authority. Yes. And I think as well it's quite like an artsy film. Yes. In its own ways.
Yes, definitely.
And yeah, I think I really like as well that it's kind of, it ties together the extreme with romance and kind of makes a joke of it.
Yeah.
And does something extreme, but in a way that is presented as if it is like this romantic tale of love. And also the film has obviously a lot of symbolism and things in it. So I think to me, it's just a film that encompasses a lot of the things that I like in the extreme genre without it making me feel like I want to rip my own eyes out.
Yeah, definitely. It relatively palatable for an extreme piece of cinema, I think. Relatively.
Yeah. I mean, I think someone I know actually watched it the other week. They were like, oh, I must watch it after you suggested it. And I was like, okay. And then we went to the pub and they were like, yeah, so I didn't enjoy that movie. And I was like, yeah.
Yeah, I enjoy about 50% of it and I kind of hate another 50% of it. I think I'm mixed on it, definitely. Would you even say this is a horror film?
I don't know, because it's kind of not, in a way. It's kind of more like it's often described as exploitation / art film. But I think because it has, I mean, and this is a discussion though that I see at the moment, everyone is like, is this a horror film? Of course. Is this a horror film? And I think it's quite a personal thing to define it. Think of as But, you know, I see, you know, having sex with a dead body is quite a horror theme. So I'll say yes.
It's so true. And I would agree. And I think there are moments, right, towards the end, there's a kind of third act in which this person becomes a murderer.
Yes.
I think then it descends more into proper horror.
Yeah,
but until that point, you kind of don't really know what you're watching.
No, because, I mean, even, you know, the soundtrack is amazing. That has to be, when I was rewatching the film last week, I was like, I forgot how much I loved the soundtrack.
And again, the soundtrack isn't horror, right?
No, not at all. Yeah. You know, like, it's... Actually, if you took the soundtrack and put it against like Love Actually, it would still work really well. And I think that's why, so funny about it. And I think that's why when you watch the first act, you're like, you know, it's very like, it's very like lovey-dovey in terms of its tone.
Yes.
It's very confusing.
It's funny. I was talking to someone about this the other day. Like, is necrophilia still one of the most taboo subjects? It feels like it's still something that is very rarely covered in cinema, and if it is, it's still considered quite shocking, I think. Like, I remember a couple of years back thinking of a more mainstream movie, but Nicholas Winding Refn's The Neon Demon. Do you remember, if you've seen it, there's a scene in which a dead body in a morgue is basically, you know, there's a kind of love-making scene with this dead body, and people were disgusted by that. I remember at the cinema, people walking out, you know. It's so fun. Like, I thought that was quite funny, that scene, you know. But there is still this real taboo, I think, when it comes to this subject matter as well.
Yeah, I think necrophilia is, you know, I think you've got like a lot of subjects, but that seems to be one where people really, they don't want to even think about it existing.
Exactly. People don't want to acknowledge it even as a thing.
No, well, and it's like, you know, a lot of people obviously at the moment got this like serial killer thing going on, and it's like, seems to be everyone in the world is obsessed. And obviously there's a lot about Ted Bundy at the moment. But you listen to a lot and they brush over very quickly the necrophilia parts. And even a lot of the podcasts I listen to, true crime, they're very quick to go, and they did this with a body. And on to the next thing.
Interesting, isn't it?
Whereas actually, you know, for a lot of the serial killers, it is a big part of what they do. And I mean, I think it's just hard to wrap your head around how anyone would even want to do that. You know, you kind of go, doesn't make sense. Why? What do you gain from it?
Yeah, and I find it fascinating how, and I know this is something often said of American culture, but I think everywhere that we're still more shocked by sex than we are by violence. Like you're so right. True crime is a perfect example of how we're all fascinated by murders and murderers and serial killers, but we don't want to hear about that stuff going on.
No, not at all.
It's so interesting. There's still this kind of like barrier with a lot of audiences.
And I think especially, I guess, in the UK, where we've always been quite prudish.
Yeah.
And you speak about things and everyone's like, oh, you shouldn't mention that. Like, I think even the other day, and I'm usually quite open, my dad mentioned something about it in a movie and I was like, no, Dad. I was like, let's not have a discussion about it. And he was like, come on, you're an adult. And I was like, no, I don't know about those things. Just because it is, everyone's like, so I guess if you take what is already an uncomfortable topic and then you add the dead element, it's suddenly like, no, that doesn't exist. We forget about that one.
Exactly. And I think you're right, like you said at the beginning, it's true, isn't it? This director of Necromantic, he did essentially make this movie as a way to just push people's buttons, right? Or to kind of to sort of push back against German film censors, is that right?
Yeah, because at the time, I mean, and I think before as well, because I think it was released in 1987.
Yeah, 87.
Yeah, basically censorship was very rife, and actually it still is today, because my friend in Germany is constantly like, I can't watch anything because they, he has to import DVDs from other places because you still can't get it. And I guess a lot of that obviously stems back from World War II and kind of propaganda and everything being controlled in terms of censorship. And I think from Jorg, it was basically him kind of saying, F you, I'm going to make a movie that no one wants to see and that it was 100% going to get banned. However, I did read that apparently it wasn't until Necromantic 2 that came out that they picked up on both of the movies and was like, nope, you can't have this at all. And just, outright kind of banned it from... And I mean, it's actually still banned in a lot of places now.
It is interesting. We'll come back to Necromantic 2. But yeah, the first one, do you know... I don't, but do you know what kind of a release it had in the UK? Did it play in any cinemas at all? Was it one of those that just kind of got leaked out on VHSs?
It was banned in the UK as well. It wasn't until 2014 that the BBFC gave it an 18 classification, and then it started to get distributed because obviously Arrow released what is a beautiful DVD.
Stunning.
And my favourite birthday present ever. So it was pretty much you couldn't really get it anywhere until then. And
it's amazing, isn't it? I mean, so what do you think of how does it hold up in terms of just as a piece of filmmaking itself? I mean, you said in some ways it's more of a kind of art house movie.
Yeah.
Does it is it a coherent narrative for you? Are you invested in these, I suppose, these central characters, these central relationships, whatever you want to call them within this story?
I don't think you end up being that invested in them because actually, I mean, like the dialogue is pretty poor in the film.
And it's pretty sparse, right? There's not really much.
There's not. It's more about kind of like the imagery that you see and less about. And I think actually there's a reason for that.
Yes.
I think it's purposefully portrayed with you not being invested in the characters because almost like a body they kind of throw away and it's everyone is kind of a corpse that ends up just getting dug up and turned into an object to be used by other people. Yeah. And I think that's why there's not that much dialogue. You don't know anything about the characters. You barely see them even be in their relationship. I mean, we presume they're happy. Yes. They seem to be okay until the third party comes in and ruins everything for them. And I think the story is there. There's some fragmented parts because you kind of have like flashbacks and some dream sequences. Yeah. So it's a little bit kind of like, 1 minute you're in the agency and they're talking about, dirty clothes and being unhappy with Rob's work performance. And then, next thing you see the couple, they're eating, what is the corpse, I suppose. Yeah. Having a bath, so it does kind of jot a bit all over the place.
Yeah, it almost is a bit like montagey in some regards. It, not to sound like a complete wanker, it reminds me a little bit of the old, Louis Buñuel film, Un Chien Andalou, from the 20s, where it's like, here's a scene of somebody getting their eyes sliced, here's a scene of this, here's a scene of that, and it's kind of like a montage of strange, extreme images.
Well, it's also almost what they started to do with Mondo Cane and Faces of Death, where it was almost, I know obviously they're real, but, just
a series
just kind
of images.
Scenes. And it's more focused on, I guess, just kind of showing you these nasty things and there being no background story needed. It's just, this is horrible, have a look.
there's an uncomfortable amount of urination at the beginning as well. I was like,
it opens,
literally the opening shot, isn't it, is of a woman pissing, which I thought was quite funny.
Yeah.
And then there's a really horrible, just like, close-up of a man weeing into a urinal that I was like, oh, this is really gross.
I mean, I actually, when I was watching it, I was actually at the gym on the bicycle, and there was a man sat next to me, and I was like, I felt so awful. And I saw him look over, and it was that exact scene. I was like, why?
That is brilliant.
And he left. He literally got off the bike, and I was like, it makes sense. Like,
I love that you watched that at the gym. That is brilliant.
Everyone at the gym is like, there's that creepy person again. Like,
I was like, right, close the curtains. I don't even want the neighbours to see what I'm watching.
I was like, show them all. Let them know.
Let them all see. That is brilliant. Yeah, and it is like you say, the opening shot, literally a woman pissing. You like, it is like, right, we are going to push your buttons from the beginning, aren't we? We're going to.
It's like, what don't you want to see? Here it is.
And I, as with a lot of these films that we've talked about, I am impressed at the practical effects, because this is a very low budget film, I'm assuming. And after the car crash, where you get those guys turn up with the bin bags and like just pull apart the bits of body and put them into bags, I was like, well, that's pretty grisly, gnarly, impressive stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the special effects in this are amazing. And they're by I know his first name is Franz. I can't remember his second name. Begins with an R.
Yeah.
But yeah, apparently he worked directly with Jorg and also Descartes, not sure. Lorenz, I think, something like that. The guy that plays Rob.
Right.
They all work together to make kind of the corpse, the main corpse.
Yes.
And that, I mean, it looks very real. It's got all the slime and it's very it's obviously like kind of a skeleton rather than but it's got a lot of
viscera on it.
Yeah. And like you said, when they're kind of cleaning the bodies, there's a lot of parts and it looks really good.
It does look
really good. And I think that's obviously one of the merits of the film is kind of the special effects of it. For the time as well, were very, very well done, and for the low budget. I mean, I don't know what the budget is, but you can tell
it's low.
Yeah. I mean,
and I think it has to convince you, at least in that regard, doesn't it? I think if that element wasn't there, it wouldn't have much to recommend it. So, like, as with a lot of extreme movies, it's like, if you're not actually going to get that realistic extreme stuff, then what is the point in it, kind of thing?
Well, I mean, I've seen some, and the effects, I'm like, what?
Yeah.
I mean, I know at home I could make something that looks better, like just mixing things up.
Sometimes some of them look like they're something out of like Aardman animation or something as well.
And it's,
like,
I mean...
Yeah. The one moment, of course, which we've kind of touched upon this, but the one moment that I really almost had to turn off is the bit of animal cruelty in it. Because it's just, again, it kind of pissed me off, because it felt like they are just, and I know the point of this movie is that they are just throwing shocking images at you, but I was like, oh, did that rabbit have to die for this? And it had no effect, no relation to the narrative whatsoever either.
Well,
it was just
supposedly it's what causes, and this has to be someone's very loose theory that they made. Supposedly it's a flashback of Rob's to a trauma that happened, which is why he likes
that's why
dead bodies and things. Apparently, however, even I was like, I don't know why this is here. I was like, I never made that connection until I read online. Someone was like, well, this is what it means. And I was like, it's a stretch.
I just hated it. I wish it just didn't. I just wish they I just wish that hadn't been there, to be
Yeah,
honest.
and
It
then
kind
they
of
bring
ruined the
it
experience
back
for
at
me.
the end as
Yeah,
well.
they do. They do.
Backwards to almost make you feel like the rabbit's coming back alive, which made me feel sadder because I was like, because he's not coming back.
It's just horrible.
Yeah.
And I think it's everything about it is horrible. It's actually the latter half of it, the gory half of it, where they're skinning it, is actually not that bad. It's the stuff before it where they are killing it, and where he's carrying it and it looks so distressed. I was like, oh fuck me, I can't watch this.
Well, and also as soon as he picks it up, you go, no.
Yeah, no.
It's like you know, and
you do.
yeah, I mean, I would agree. Like if it could be redone, I think.
Just get rid of that.
Like you said, obviously it's there to shock.
I know.
But it's sad. Like it makes it sad, and
I hate it.
None of us like.
It's the only time, and I never really am, to be honest, pro censorship on anything. But it's the only time when I'm like, if I was in control of this, I'd cut that fucking seed out because I'm like, fuck you for putting it in there and killing it just for your. For
no reason.
Quote unquote art, you know. It just annoyed me.
Exactly.
I didn't mind the cat because obviously I'm assuming that wasn't real, where you put a cat in a bag and then smashed it to death.
I mean, that scene's kind of like funny.
Yes.
You know, because obviously
because I could accept that was a cut. There was a cut there, and that I'm assuming. I really hope that isn't a cat in that bag. Yeah.
I mean, and obviously he's kind of like having a temper tantrum because she's left him.
Yes.
Throwing this cat around, and
and actually it's just on the shelf.
It's just like, just dry it out. It's like kind of drying back, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh god. Yeah. It's just when you know it's real, isn't it? It's just that there's something to it where you think,
it changes everything.
It completely changes the way I look at things. Yeah. But we should talk about the central set piece of the threesome with the dead body.
Yes.
I mean, that is again, I guess it's kind of funny / uncomfortable because it really is, like you've mentioned, it's shot and lit and scored like a kind of porno scene or like a romantic scene or something, isn't it? It's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean it's almost like softcore pornography in the way that it's presented, and like you said, the score over it is. You know, you would expect to see, if there was no dead body in there, you would expect to see that scene in like a nice romance film, you know, because without dead body, it's not actually that, you know, kind of gratuitous in terms of like the sex that they show.
Totally, you're right. It's like a softcore late night Channel 5 movie from the 90s, right?
Exactly. And, you know, even when they're with the dead body, they're very gentle, you know, it's kissing, it's very like sensual.
Yeah.
It's not, as you expect, like something, you know, nasty kind of just going in hard or something. It's very kind of, you know, part of their relationship and
she has to attach something to it as a penis, doesn't she? It's like a pipe or something.
Yeah, I think they cut like a chair leg or a pipe, and then she even puts a condom on it. And I actually read somewhere online that apparently there was a magazine that reckoned that was like talking about safe sex and avoiding AIDS, and I was like,
so funny.
I was like, I'm not quite sure we can take that away from it, but you know, if it works for you, like.
I love the idea that in amongst all of this extreme imagery, they're like, but safe sex people.
Well, I mean, they practice it, you know, even with, which I found confusing because I was like, it's not him, it's just the chair leg.
Yes,
I was like, I don't know where the chair leg's been. But,
again, that's what just makes it just adds to this feeling of absolute absurdity, which I kind of loved about that. I did love about that scene that this is all so ridiculous that I kind of found it quite fun.
And I think that's why it's like one of the funner extreme films, because you don't watch that and go, you know, it's not. It's got the tone where it's kind of going, you know, it's a piss take of itself in a way.
It is.
And obviously, like, that imagery has become very popular with her, with the skull, you know, like caressing it, but it's not. I don't know. It's just not too nasty. It's quite kind of, you go, oh. It's kind of nice.
Exactly.
In a messed up way.
Exactly. I thought there was an interesting moment as well when the boyfriend goes to the cinema and they're all watching like an extreme film. They're all watching what looks like a slasher film or something, right? Again, which I thought was quite interesting. Again, it's that kind of like comment on all of these people watching this sort of woman get butchered on screen, right, or something.
And even in that scene, they all start kind of like making out. And it's like, you know... Because actually, you know, you think, you know, when people say like Netflix and chill, and if you have a horror movie, I've always been like, one, I actually want to watch the film, don't touch me. And two, I was like, isn't that like an uncomfortable thing to, you know, if someone's on screen getting mad and you're like, you know what time it is?
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
you
it's
know, to pair them together, it shouldn't kind of go.
So true. And how often do we think of like horror movies as date movies, basically, aren't they? And they are, and you know, slasher movies, if you take the most classic example, slasher movies, where it is like women, boobs, and then stabbed to death, basically.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, do you want to watch a slasher movie?
Yeah.
Like, so it's quite strange
Yeah.
that, you know, and in society we obviously end up doing those things.
Yeah.
And I guess, yeah, in that scene, I mean, obviously he's very sad in that scene. Bless him, he's all alone.
I know.
But yeah, like you said, and, you know, it's a very kind of like violent sexual scene on screen. They're all like, oh, it's time to make out.
Yeah.
And poor Rob's just like, oh, I'm on my own.
I know, and I do think that's quite interesting because I feel like the film is kind of making us reckon with that a little bit. Like, how come this is okay to watch and get off on, essentially, and this isn't, sort of thing?
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. It's quite a nice, like, kind of comparison.
I liked that. And let's talk about the phenomenal climax, and I mean climax literally.
Literally, yeah.
It's just one of the best things I've ever seen. The big giant fake cock that's ejaculating while he's stabbing himself.
Oh my god! I remember the first time I watched it, and obviously the whole way through, I was like, and then it got to that scene, I was like, well, that's one way to end the movie. That is certainly the way to end it.
Of course,
really.
it is. It's the perfect way to end it, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's. I mean, it's obviously a lot about kind of like machism and those things, but yeah, like you said, there's the giant cock that's obviously very fake, similar to the one that's in a Serbian film, which is like the length of my entire leg. But again, I guess that scene's kind of presented as like very depressing, very sad.
That's it. It's like
and
so
the music
moving.
Again, it's like really. It's meant to be very emotional. I mean, obviously, it's quite funny watching it, but it's presented in like this very emotional
it's like
way.
kind of melodramatic, isn't it? I suppose is the best way
like,
to
almost like a
describe it.
drama.
Yes, it's so brilliant, and you know the gore. There's again, it's just like you couldn't get more taboo than that image of a guy masturbating / stabbing himself.
Well,
and ejaculating.
in Arrow's box set, it comes with like some prints, and one of them is literally that scene, and I was like, that's the one I'll stick on the wall. I was like, for the family to come and have a look at.
Yeah. And just, isn't it interesting, you know, again, just like what people are shocked by and what they aren't. And 90% of this film, I kind of thought it was quite fun and quite silly, and I quite enjoyed it. And then it's just that one scene with the rabbit that made me feel kind of sick and angry, and nothing else I had a problem with at all. But of course, I can see why some of these other moments would really disgust and gross people out as well. It's so interesting. But I thought that was a great ending. I loved that.
Perfect ending.
Oh, perfect ending.
And then obviously you get the shovel at the end. Ready to continue.
A great like sort of end shot as well. Yeah. She's about to bring him back. And so I've never seen the sequel. So what is the sequel like? Because I've heard that's worse. Is it like kind of more extreme?
Yeah, the sequel is because obviously in Necromantic, actually when you, because the runtime's pretty short, it's about like
70 minutes or something.
So the runtime's quite short, and when you look at it, there's not that, you know, there's those key moments, but then there's a lot of kind of filler parts, and they're not extreme at all. I mean, it's just random things happening. Whereas in the sequel, there's a lot more of the necrophilia, and obviously it's focused on a girl who actually isn't the girlfriend in the first film. It's a bit confusing. It seems like she is, but she isn't. She's a different one, and she digs up a body, and then it's just her and the body, so there's no other person kind of in it, and it's all about her being with the body. And there's even a scene in it where she invites over her friends for like a girls' night in, and they watch I think they watch videos of necrophilia on the TV, and they're all laughing with like drinks, and on the table is her dead body's head. And they're all like, you know, so it's a bit more extreme in terms of, you know, how far they go with it. But again, I guess it is kind of runs with that piss take type thing.
Right.
You know, now it's like the gal, and even in the first, it's the gal that's into it. It's not him at all. Like,
yeah.
I mean, he does it all for her, and then she runs away
and
with
then
the
he's
body.
left by himself. Exactly. Yeah, I know. Brilliant. That's hilarious. So, do you like the second one as much as the first, or?
I think I prefer the first, but I like the second because as well, it's quite, in some ways, you know, about like the woman being the one that's doing all the murdering, well, not the murdering, but doing all the nasty stuff, which you don't see that often. You know, it's always a male character that wants to get involved in depravity. So I think the second one, from that point of view, it's
quite interesting.
Yeah, it's like, oh, okay, she's into it. Like, it's kind of nice to see the tables turn.
Yeah, exactly. I like that. That's good. So, you know, for people, I mean, if people listen to this, they've heard us describe most of the worst scenes anyway. But for people who haven't seen it, would you recommend Necromantic to horror fans? Would you recommend it with a caveat? I mean, what would you say?
I would maybe recommend it with a caveat. It's not a typical horror film, that's for sure. It's definitely, you know, it is art house, it's exploitation, it's something a bit different. But if you're interested in special effects, if you like art-based kind of movies, and I guess if you like more extreme towards pushing the boundary, then it's definitely worth a watch. And also, I guess, for its kind of historical standpoint as well, it's kind of one to, and you can tell everyone that you've watched
it.
Yeah, watched that film.
Absolutely. From my point of view, with all of these extreme films, I'm always tempted to at least watch them once. You know, at least some of these most iconic, these most famous ones. It's like, you've got to try it.
Right?
You've got to, exactly.
You can go, well, I watched Necromantic and it was a film that I watched.
Exactly.
And that's that.
And it's not something I'm going to forget anytime soon. So there you go. Yeah. Amazing. Zobo, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been
so
fun.
It's been so much fun. This is something I ask every new guest. What is your favourite horror movie?
Ooh, that's a tough question. Very tough. Probably The Evil Dead.
Interesting. Interesting. Nice. That's a good. The original. I'm glad you said that and not Evil Dead 2, because so many people prefer number 2.
They do, and I love the trilogy as a whole, but I mean, it was actually, it obviously has a lot of nostalgia reasons for me because it was one of the first, but I don't know, it's a great movie and it's fun. It's so fun. I mean, so much fun. The effects are actually quite awful, but also great for them, and it's a fun movie.
I still think it's gross, the pencil and the ankle. It still gets me.
The parts that are pretty nasty.
Amazing. And what's your favourite extreme film?
Ooh, that's a good question.
And I suppose favourite is almost a difficult word to say with these sorts of films.
I'm probably gonna go towards maybe Martyrs.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
as a film that I can watch.
Yeah.
Again and again.
It's like a perfect film in some ways, I think, Martyrs. It's not one I can watch a lot of, but it is perfect. Yeah. Good choices. Zobo, where can people find you? If they want to come find you on social media and track down your podcast and that kind of thing, where can they find you?
They can find me on Twitter. I am Zobo with Shotgun. No A, because Twitter has a character limit. Yeah. On Instagram and Facebook, Zobo With A Shotgun. Then online, Zobo With A Shotgun, surprise, surprise. And the same for the podcast. And also over at Jump Cut Online, doing quite a few horror-based things on there at the moment.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And there we have it. A big thank you for listening to this week's podcast, and a big thank you to my two amazing guests, Alex Ayling and Zobo With A Shotgun. Don't forget, if you want to check out Zobo's new podcast, you can find all of the details online, and I've also listed them in the show notes. So, what did you think of this week's episode? What do you think of Braindead? I would love to hear your thoughts on this masterpiece. And if there's anyone out there who has seen Nekromantik, I'd love to know what you think of that movie. Do you agree with Zobo that it is some kind of strange artistic masterpiece, or do you agree with me that it's actually a bit infuriating at times, get in touch. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram. Don't forget, you can also follow us on Letterboxd, where you can keep up to date with what movies we're going to be discussing week by week. Just go to Evolution Pod on Letterboxd. There is also a discussion group, the Evolution of Horror discussion group. That's where you can chat about horror movies, about the podcast, about anything you like with fellow listeners. That's the Evolution of Horror discussion group, and that can be found on Facebook. You can find all episodes of this podcast, all previous seasons, as well as a load of written reviews in our blog section on our website. Just go to evolutionofhorror.com. And again, if you want to become a patron of the Evolution of Horror and donate a few quid a month in order to get regular bonus episodes, please just go to patreon.com/evolutionofhorror and sign up now. Okay, on to next week then. Now, I find, when it comes to most subgenres, I think pretty much every one we've got to so far, there is a kind of dead zone when we get into the 90s, and the zombie subgenre is no different. There's not a lot that happens between movies like Braindead in 1992 and then a kind of zombie resurgence that happens in 2002, at least in the film medium. But next week, we are going to be looking at possibly one of the most famous and well-known zombie properties of all time. It's not a film, it's not a TV show, it's not a book, it's a video game. I'm going to be joined by horror journalist and games journalist Louise Blaine, and we are going to be talking about Resident Evil, the game franchise that kicked off in the mid-90s and is still going strong now. But not just Resident Evil, we're actually going to branch out and talk about all things horror video games. It's going to be a really broad episode. We're going to be talking about why and how the horror genre works so well in the video game medium. Louise is going to be recommending some of her personal favourite horror games and some of her scariest horror games. We're then going to look at what's known as the curse of the video game movie. Why is it that so many video game film adaptations are so shit? And we are then going to finish the episode with an in-depth review of Paul W.S. Anderson's Resident Evil movie from 2002. So exciting, absolutely loads of stuff to cover next week. Cannot wait. Join us then for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.